Rise of Hawk, Part 2, Scene 10. Cheetah held it at arm's length and stared at it like it was an alien. The baby blinked sightlessly back at her. It was pudgy and warm, and it had a giant head with eyes bigger than she thought possible for such a small creature. It lifted one arm up and put most of its hand in its mouth to suck on. Drool spilled slowly down the strange creature's chin and arm. Cheetah blinked at it. What was she supposed to do with this ball of flesh and bones and fluids? For a completed mission I must kill the child, she thought firmly. But I tried to kill it before. The little thing wanted to suck on the barrel. She frowned in complete confusion. She wasn't sure why, but she knew suddenly that she could not kill this strange creature. It didn't matter that her orders were to kill everyone in the building, regardless of age or traitor status. It didn't matter that if they found out, she would be executed, and there was a very real risk of putting her family in the crosshairs as well. She simply could not kill the child. But what should I do with it now? It was completely ridiculous to take it back to the agency and her supervisor. The baby would be killed immediately, and there would be consequences. But she only had a few hours before her exit pass expired, and if she wasn't back by that time to report in, they would assume she was MIA or that she had defected. She didn't want either of those outcomes on her flawless record, nor the potential risk to her family that both consequences might threaten. So, the only solution was to find someone to take the child with no questions asked. But who would take on an orphan baby? A wind brushed through the nearby open door and coated them in a flash of icy air. She shivered. The baby, only clothed in a diaper, looked up at her with an odd little baby noise, and she sensed a distinct telepathic impression that it too was cold and wanted her, as the adult, to warm it. The assassin turned her head on the side and raised one eyebrow at it. The child wasn't even old enough to speak or walk, and yet it could communicate telepathically. How strange. Cheetah cautiously brought the child closer to her body. Tucking the small thing under her jacket, she transferred all of its weight onto one arm and her hip, and held it to her side under her jacket. She felt it curl up against her shirt and get comfortable in her body heat. With the child warmed and seemingly comfortable, she put her mind back to the task of finding it some kind of home. She stared out through the door and down the long driveway towards the street. She couldn't be seen dumping the child at an orphanage or even at the front door of some private residence, because if it got back to them that she couldn't kill it, and worse still, she had attempted to hide it from the agency, she would be in even more danger. Assassins who did not kill on command were retired, and at the age of 17, retirement meant death. However, once a home was found for it, she could lie to her supervisor about the child. She could just simply say it wasn't there, like the other children. She frowned. Where could she leave it without being seen? Scene break. The assassin stood in an alley behind the old cathedral. There were too many people at the front doors. Maybe there was some kind of afternoon service happening, maybe a wedding. Whatever it was, there were too many people at the front for her to go in unnoticed. But now she didn't know what to do. If she knocked on the back door and left the child on the threshold, there was no guarantee that someone would answer. She had no cover or time to simply watch to make sure. Her arm had started to get tired from the bullet graze last night. The baby was asleep and she was afraid to move it in case waking it would cause it to yell and attract unwanted attention. In front of her, the back door opened and she nearly jumped out of her skin. A man stepped out and looked up at her with mild surprise. He dropped a small plastic rubbish bag onto the concrete and stared at her. She didn't really notice his appearance except for his vivid blue eyes. She stared at the blueness and wondered if she should just turn and leave, maybe find some other solution. A cool breeze floated down the alley towards her. On the wind were the evening scents of the city and foods from the many restaurants nearby. She was also dimly aware of the feeling of static laced into those various elements. The breeze and static flowed around her, brushing at the loose hair of her ponytail and swirling towards the man who stood rigid in the doorway. The static meant something Timesay related. Perhaps he was the one to look after this child. The priest looked kind and, aside from his eyes, painfully normal. Surely he would find a home for this baby sleeping under her jacket. With deliberate control of her own body language, she allowed the shock on her face to fade into fear and uncertainty. She wanted to look like some girl who'd found a baby in the dumpster, but was scared and didn't know what to do with it. The blue-eyed man reacted immediately to her shift in body language, with a welcoming smile. "Good evening. Can I help you?" She feigned fear and made her voice quiet and uncertain. I don't know. I found a baby, and I don't know what to do with it." Shifting her weight, she opened the corner of her jacket and let the priest see the baby's sleeping face underneath. He stepped forward, and she allowed herself to flinch a little. This would tell him that she was afraid and quite ready to run off, and that would produce slow and careful movements in him, so she could predict his behaviour, as well as get away quickly if need be. He looked up from the child and directly into her eyes. The slightest twitch of a frown creased his forehead, and then he smiled carefully. His voice was calm and almost gentle. "The church can find a safe home for the baby. You don't have to worry about him anymore." He lifted his arms towards her, implying that he wanted her to hand over the baby. Brushing her long jacket aside, she lifted the baby from her hip. In the process, her elbow knocked the hidden gun holster under her left armpit, and her onyx-handled gun fell out onto the concrete. Quickly, she dropped the baby onto the man's hands and retrieved a weapon from the ground. Dropping all pretense of a frightened teenager, she lifted the weapon to point it at him. He didn't seem afraid or react to her, other than his eyes widening again. Her voice was cold. "Tell no one where you got this baby." "I wouldn't have told anyone official. You needn't threaten me." His voice was calmer than she expected, and there was no trace of fear in his face. "I can imagine an assassin's job is difficult when it involves innocent children." He smiled. A gentle confidence passed over his face, and she frowned. It wasn't like anyone she had met before. He wasn't afraid of her weapon or her coldness. She terrified most ordinary people when they caught a glimpse of it. "Remember for future reference that anyone can find private sanctuary at the cathedral. We have no political ties here. That includes orphaned children and agency assassins. If you ever need help again, simply ask for me by name. I am Father Owen." With the baby held tightly in his arms, he turned and walked towards the back door of the cathedral. Cheetah took this opportunity to disappear silently into the shadows of the evening. By the time the priest reached the door and turned around to look out at the alley, she was gone. Scene 11. Nalana sat cross-legged on the floor of their kitchen. Young Jenna sat opposite her on the concrete as they coloured the pictures she and her brother had drawn in the crayon last night. The girl leaned sideways and shuffled through an old cardboard box filled with used crayons. "Here, Nala, I found a yellow." Jenna lifted the battered crayon to show her. Nalana grinned. "Now I can colour that wonderful flower your brother drew." The girl handed her the crayon. She took it with a deliberately polite, "Thank you, Jenna." Without batting an eyelid, Jenna replied in kind, "You're most welcome, Miss Shanna." Nalana grinned approvingly. "That's good, Jenna, you remembered." Down the hall came the sound of a double rap on wood, likely the front door. Nalana frowned. No one ever knocked at Nama and Carla's base because no one visited who wasn't expected. "Stay here." The little girl nodded and continued colouring the rough lines on the floor. Nalana got to her feet and headed towards the front entrance. She sensed no malice outside. In fact, the two presences seemed calm, contented and friendly. She didn't have a gun and wouldn't know how to use it if she had, but she figured that few people could fake friendliness empathically, and few others would know where Nama's building was located, so it should be fairly safe. When she opened the door, a priest stood there in his black robes. He held a baby in his arms, and had the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. Hi," she said uncertainly. The man grinned, and she immediately liked him. "Hello, is Nama around? I think this little one belongs with you guys." The baby turned in his arms, and immediately reached towards her with tiny clenching fists. "Na na 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 na," they babbled happily. Smiling at the baby, she touched their dark hair. You're friendly, aren't you? Child's empathic personality was a deep blue, not unlike another little one about their age that she knew. Realizing, Nala blinked at the priest. Taman? How did you get Taman Bew? There was sympathy in the man's eyes. I suspect his parents were killed by an assassin. You might not have heard yet. She couldn't handle any more loss. In fact, she refused to. Thank you, Father. What was your name? He seemed to sense that she wanted more information than simply his name, and supplied it. I am Father Owen. I'm a friend of Father Andrew's. Did the monastery trade run yesterday and met Nama. Is he around? She shook her head. Nalana? Jenna stood in the open kitchen doorway, staring down the hall at them. How would I address him? He's not Misha or Mishan because he's not family. Nalana swallowed the ball of pain in her throat and turned to smile at Jenna. You would address him as Shan, or Jankashan, because he's an apprentice priest. But here and now, you'd call him Sir or Father. The little girl wandered up to them, and standing close to Nalana, she bowed formally. Good afternoon, Father. I am Jenna. With a hand to the baby's back, he bowed just as formally. Good day, Lady Jenna. It is nice to meet you. The girl giggled at being called lady and skittered back towards the kitchen. Where did you learn the language of the ancients, Nalana? Turning back to him, she shook her head. I can't speak it, but my mother taught me little bits like the correct way of addressing people in greetings. You recognize it? One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Yes, I have been learning to read the early scriptures, and the oldest are in ancient. I'm not fluent either. It's a very complicated language. Lifted the baby up, and she took little Tim into her arms. Please tell Nama. Nala! This time the interruption came from Jenna's 5-year-old brother, Nada. He ran down the hall from the stairs, clutching his hand. When he got to her, the little boy was crying. Oh dear, what happened this time? Door, he sniffled. Bit me. He showed her his red fist. Shuffling Taman onto her hip, she placed one hand gently over the bruise. At the moment of contact with his stinging skin, a pulse of staticky healing energy pushed through her body. The energy washed away the underlying pain of damaged flesh, filling the spaces with a cooling sensation that would cover the pain and increase the boy's ability to heal, so that by the time the cover wore off, there would be no underlying pain left. The energy shut off, and she lifted her hand from his. The redness was gone, and only a little bloodless graze remained. Thank you, Nala. No problem. Now go help your sister with the kitchen drawings. I won't be long. She watched the boy walk down the hall. From behind her, the priest's voice was gentle. You're a healer. She looked back at him with a laugh. Yes, but not as good as Misha Ren. They can heal so that bullets come out of wounds. Her words trailed off as she realized she was giving out information about someone else to a stranger, and changed the subject a little. I wish I could learn to be a better healer. Well, he said with a smile, did you know that the Cathedral College is offering a free nursing program? As long as you're not on the agency watch list, you should be able to study anonymously. If you're interested, induction starts tomorrow at 10 a.m. Just come and find me before then and I'll get you in, if you want. That would be perfect, thank you. She put a hand over her mouth to contain the bubble of joyous cheering that wanted to come out of her. She bowed formally, as he had to Jenna. It was nice meeting you, Nalana. I hope to see you tomorrow. She returned the formal bow, careful not to tip the baby out of her arms. Thank you. I will do my best to be there, and I'll tell Nama that you came by when he returns.